Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And I'm going to cover a really amazing band that came out of the punk movement called the Homosexuals. And they revolve around a guy named Bruno Wizard. And there's a number of other people in it: Ben Harris, Dima Vincent, Neil Morosini, and a cast of hundreds. There's all kinds of members floating in and out of the band. And they started out as a punk band called the Rejects in 1976, and they did play shows with a lot of the big bands. And they basically got together, they booked the gig, and then they put together a band. And so they're pretty primitive when they first started out, and there's some Rejects material out there. But then in 1978, they morphed into a band called the Homosexuals, and they immediately started cranking out a bunch of singles, all on the Black Noise label, including a 12-inch called Hearts in Exile. And that's the first time I came across them was that. And they were also on a sampler for Recommended Records. So pretty interesting that a punk band like this got signed to Recommended Records, which was famous for the Art Bears and Henry Cow spin-offs and all the more progressive rock bands and whatnot. So they're really an anomaly in the Recommended Records catalog. And they finally got around to releasing an album in 1978 called the Homosexuals album. And it's a total classic. And one of the things that's interesting about the band is that, first of all, you can tell there's a lot of good players. I mean, there's a lot of weird shit going on and all their stuff. But in the midst of it, you can tell that these people know how to play their instruments. So it's really interesting that they adapted the punk format or the post-punk format to do their music. And unlike a lot of the big punk bands like the Buzzcocks and the Sex Pistols and the Damned, they took a different route. So they have more in common with bands like Alternative TV and the Swell Maps. And the other thing that distinguishes them is they're really lo-fi. Right from the beginning, it seems like they really didn't record very well, but it seems to be intentional. And the needle's in the red a lot of time. There's built-in distortion into a lot of their recordings, and it kind of really adds to their whole vibe. But what is fascinating about them is that their tunes are full of surprises, all kinds of interesting instrumentation involved in it, really interesting recording techniques for lo-fi recording. Things just come popping out of nowhere in interesting places. So they really had quite an imagination putting the material together. And then the other thing is that the core fact that they wrote catchy tunes. There's a really great pop element to their songs, so their songs are really memorable, even with all the craziness going on behind them. And sort of like bands like Family Fodder, they're atypical of what was considered punk at the time, and they're full of wonderful youthful energy and excitement of discovery. And then within 2 or 3 minutes, all kinds of crazy shit happens. And then you add to that the fact that even with the lo-fi recordings, even though they're in the punk format, even though there's a lot of crazy weird noises going on all the time, you get these glimpses that they're really good players. When you hear a guitar solo or something like that, or you really listen to what the drums are doing, or keyboards or anything else, there's really good players involved. But they really created their own universe, and when it gets down to it, I hear a lot of glimpses of well-known bands. I mentioned the Swell Maps and Alternative TV, but sometimes you hear a little bit of Gang of Four, and sometimes you hear a little bit of Buzzcocks. So that element is in there too. But at first listen, you might think to pass them over because, like I mentioned, they have this lo-fi quality and a relative simplicity of the basic arrangements. But then you get into all the other shit, and there's dub elements, there's punk rock elements, there's folk elements, there's a few jazz elements, there's a lot of random noises and things that create a whole universe within a 2 or 3 minute song. And fortunately, we have the release of the album. I have the CD because it's got a bunch of bonus tracks, but this is their actual official album that came out. But there's also wonderfully a package of all their complete recordings, including a lot of demos and everything else. 3 CDs with about 60 songs on it, and it really covers the whole spectrum of what they did, including a lot of demos and things that were left over that are even more lo-fi than their regular recordings, and a lot of things that are obviously very bare bones demos with acoustic guitars and the like. But a really fascinating band, and I just there's when they do songs, they really get under your skin. They're just really memorable pop gems, and then this just clatter and noise of their lo-fi approach with all these things popping up in the mix in the most unexpected ways. I mean, I really enjoy a band that can continually surprise me and make the kind of choices they do where on the surface it's a straightforward pop punk song, but then all these other random elements come into it, and it shows a great amount of creativity and a great amount of imagination. And I know amongst aficionados they're well thought of, but they're definitely underground still, not a high profile. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that all their records are released on Black Noise Records, and not a major label, and not even a high profile independent label like Stiff. Although I could easily have seen that band signed to Stiff. And it also would have been interesting, of course, listening to their stuff. You know, what would have happened if they got signed to a label like Stiff, and what if they really did go into a studio and have higher production values? I think they would be have a lot higher profile, and people would be talking about them more because more professional recording with all the imagination and creativity they had would have gone a long way to showing exactly how great the band was. But as the years have gone on, I find continual enjoyment listening to the Homosexuals, and I remember well when I was exposed to them, so to speak. Um, and I got that first album, and I was just really surprised at how great and how memorable it was, and how much they could really pull it together. Because the singles had these moments of greatness and this wonderful universe that they created. But the album is definitely definitive, and I, for one, put the Homosexuals album probably in the top 10, if not the top 20 best punk records that came out of the UK at that time. So I'll post some below. Check them out. Like I say, if you like alternative TV, if you like swell maps, the more ragged lo-fi experimental end of punk, then the Homosexuals will definitely be a band for you. And those who just like the creativity of lo-fi and pop gems buried in the middle of it, you will be amply rewarded as well. So anyway, I'm sure a lot of people out there have not heard of the Homosexuals. I'll post all these links below, and now you can say that you have heard the Homosexuals, courtesy of me, Brian Fox, here at I Hate Rock Music.